Nora Bellamy pressed her ID badge to the security door and stepped inside. The click of the lock echoed like a judgment. She tightened her ponytail and took a steadying breath. Another night shift. Another string of silent rooms, flickering monitors, and the slow rhythm of borrowed time. She moved through the polished corridors with quiet precision. The air smelled like lemon polish and antiseptic, a cold contrast to the warmth outside. Nora had learned to walk softly here. Most of the residents slept through the night, or tried to. The ones who didn't, well, she'd become good at sitting beside them, just breathing with them in the dark. Room 6B, her supervisor had said at check-in. Marchand. He's a long-termer. Doesn't speak. Doesn't move much either. Just keep the vitals logged and speak to him like he hears you, even if he doesn't. Nora paused outside the door. A brass plaque read, Harold Marchand. No flowers, no pictures, just the echo of a name. She knocked softly, more out of habit than expectation, then pushed the door open. The room was dim. A single lamp cast a puddle of light beside the bed. Harold lay still, sunken into crisp white sheets, his face pale and shadowed under the soft light. His silver hair was combed neatly back. His hands, resting atop the blanket, looked like they had once belonged to someone who could play piano by touch alone. Nora stood quietly for a moment, studying the man everyone else had stopped trying to reach. I'm Nora, she said gently, stepping closer. I'll be with you tonight. He didn't move. His eyes were closed. The monitors beside him blinked in steady rhythm, unimpressed by her presence. She adjusted the pillow beneath his head and straightened the blanket. Her fingers brushed his arm. It was warm, not lifeless, just distant. Okay, she murmured. Vitals check. Then I'll leave you in peace. She moved through her tasks quietly, efficiently. There were always 100 things to do on a night shift, but tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, she lingered. Something about him. Maybe it was the way his mouth curved slightly downward, like he was listening to a joke he didn't quite understand. Or maybe it was the file. She'd glanced through it earlier, curious. Harold Marchand, jazz pianist, played with the New Orleans Revival Quartet, toured Europe. Widowed, one son, no visits logged in 6 months. Famous once, now silent. When she finished her charting, she pulled the chair closer to the bed. Something old stirred in her chest, something she hadn't touched in a long time. Do you like music? She asked softly. Seems like you would. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out a tiny, worn metronome keychain. It was scratched and faded, but the little pendulum still clicked when she flicked it. Her father had given it to her when she was 12, back when she believed music could fix anything. I used to sing, she said, smiling faintly. My dad said it could heal people. He believed that. I'm not sure I do anymore. Silence. She sat still, the weight of the room pressing in around her. Somewhere down the hall, a call light blinked. She should go, but she didn't. Instead, she opened her mouth and began to sing, softly, uncertainly. Smile, though your heart is aching. Her voice was quiet, barely more than breath, but the melody filled the room like candlelight. Each note, a step backward into something she thought she'd lost. She sang to the silence, to the man who never spoke, to the hollow space inside herself. Behind the door, in the hallway dimmed for the night, Elliot Marchand stood with his hands in his coat pockets, frozen. He hadn't meant to be here. He never stayed past business hours. His visits were brief, procedural. Paperwork, authorizations, bills. Always just enough to say he had tried. He hadn't stepped foot in the room since his father was admitted. Couldn't, wouldn't. But tonight, something made him pause. The voice, not polished, not practiced, but honest, raw, real. He leaned closer, just enough to see through the narrow crack in the doorway. There she was, a young woman in navy scrubs, blonde hair pulled back, sitting in a vinyl chair beside his father's bed, singing like it mattered, like his father could hear her, like he was someone worth singing to. Elliot's throat tightened. Smile, even though it's breaking. The song played in the back of his mind like a memory too old to name. He remembered this melody, not just the lyrics, but how it felt. It had once drifted from a record player in the kitchen, his mother's voice humming along. She used to sing while she made Sunday tea. She had called it their family's lullaby. He hadn't heard it since the funeral. Inside the room, Nora let the last note hang in the air. Her eyes closed, breath shallow. Then silence again, but a different kind, softer. She opened her eyes, looked at Harold. Still no movement, no flicker. But something in the air had shifted. She could feel it. Nora stood, adjusting the blanket gently one last time. "Good night, Mr. Marchand," she whispered. She turned and stepped into the hallway, nearly colliding with Elliot. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, startled. He stepped back quickly. "No, it's my fault. I didn't mean to." He didn't finish the sentence. She glanced at him, confused. "Are you here to see Mr. Marchand?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, he's my father." Her face softened. I've been told he hasn't responded much." Elliot looked past her toward the room. "He hasn't. Not to me." They stood there for a beat too long. The hallway hummed quietly around them. "I'm Nora," she said, offering a small smile. "Elliot," he replied. She nodded once, then stepped past him, her footsteps quiet against the polished floor. Elliot watched her go, the sound of her voice still echoing in his mind. Inside room 6B, Harold Marchand's eyelids flickered, just once. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The morning came slowly, slipping through the wide windows of Bellevue Manor like honey poured over old brick. Nora had left just before sunrise, her footsteps tired, but her heart strangely unsettled. That song had stayed with her all the way home. Smile. She hadn't sung it in years, not since her father passed. And last night, without planning it, it had simply risen from her, unshaped but honest. She sat on the porch swing outside her Aunt Martha's bungalow, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the morning dew fade from the roses. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text from Martha. "Heard your shift ran late. Call me if you need eggs." Or encouragement. Nora smiled faintly and typed back, "Both. Later." Inside room 6B, the machines ticked on. Harold Marchand hadn't moved again, but something remained in the room from the night before, like the last note of a song still vibrating in the air. At the nurse's station, Elliot stood with a clipboard in hand, speaking quietly to the charge nurse. He was well dressed in a casual way that didn't try too hard. Light sweater over a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, polished boots. He could have stepped out of a magazine, but his eyes were tired, focused, but distant. Miss Thelma Rose rolled up behind the desk in her wheelchair, wearing a robe printed with tiny saxophones and a silk scarf tied tightly at her throat. She sipped her morning tea with the precision of a queen. "You didn't sleep," she said, without looking at him. Elliot didn't flinch. "That obvious?" "I may be half blind," she said, "but my nose is sharp as ever." "You smell like insomnia and regret." He almost laughed. Almost. Miss Thelma took another sip. "You stood outside your father's room for 40 minutes last night. You never do that. And you weren't alone." Elliot blinked. "Excuse me?" "That young nurse," she said, pointing vaguely with her spoon. "The one with the sorrow eyes and the church voice. She was in there singing." His gaze dropped. "I know. I heard her. Everyone did, sweetheart. It wasn't noise. It was something else. Like something blooming in a room that hadn't seen light in years." Elliot said nothing. "You ever think maybe silence isn't the enemy?" Thelma asked. "Sometimes we use it to hide things we don't want found." Elliot folded the clipboard and set it on the desk. "I didn't come here for therapy." "Oh, but therapy came for you," she said, smiling. He turned and walked down the hall, each step echoing more than the last. Nora returned that evening with her hair still damp from the shower, and her thoughts spinning faster than the ceiling fans in the break room. She clocked in, pulled on her scrubs, and checked the board. 6B. Marchand. Her heart did a small, inexplicable flip. As she pushed the supply cart down the hall, she noticed Elliot again, leaning against the wall near his father's door, staring at nothing. "Twice in 2 days," she said gently as she passed. He turned. "I guess I'm becoming predictable." She hesitated, then nodded toward the room. "Want to go in?" He looked at the door like it was made of fire. "I can't." She tilted her head. "Why not?" "I don't know who that man is anymore," he said, voice lower. "I knew the pianist, the perfectionist, the one who'd rather be in Prague than at my science fair. But this version, I don't know what to say to him." Nora leaned on the cart, quiet for a moment. "You don't have to say anything. Just be there. I don't think he'd even notice. You'd be surprised what people notice when they're still." Elliot looked at her, really looked at her, like he was trying to figure out where she'd come from. "Why do you sing to him?" he asked. She shrugged, lightly. "Because no one else does." "That's not an answer." She hesitated. "Because when I was little, my dad was dying too. In a place like this. I was late getting there. Never got to say goodbye. I swore if I ever had the chance to make someone feel less alone, I would." He nodded slowly, something settling behind his eyes. "You have a beautiful voice." "Thanks. It's mostly just muscle memory now." "I don't think so," he said. "Last night, it wasn't just sound. It was something else." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't get used to it. I don't usually have an audience." He looked down. "Then maybe you shouldn't stop." There was a pause between them, long and almost comfortable. Then the charge nurse called her from the end of the hall, and she pushed the cart forward, glancing back just once. That night, after the rounds were done, and the wing quieted into its usual hush, Nora returned to room 6B. She dimmed the lights, checked the monitors, and stood beside Harold's bed for a long moment. "You've got good taste in music," she whispered. "Your son thinks so too." She pulled a chair close, sat down and closed her eyes. This time, she didn't sing Smile. She chose Moon River, slower, softer. Her voice wrapped around the corners of the room, like a lullaby that had waited years to be heard again. Outside the door, Elliot sat in the same chair from the night before. This time, he brought a notebook. No laptop, no watch, just a pen and a page. He didn't write anything. He just listened. And somewhere deep within that quiet space between sound and stillness, something old began to crack. Not loudly, but enough. The next evening arrived with a hush, the sky over Savannah painted in soft lilacs and pale amber. Nora parked her car beneath the drooping branches of an old pecan tree outside Bellevue Manor, sat with the engine off for a long minute, and let the quiet settle around her. She stared at her hands resting on the wheel. They didn't tremble, but something inside her did. She had sung again, and someone had heard. Not a patient, not a stranger. Him, Elliot Marchand. The name meant something now. It clung to the edges of her thoughts, his presence from the night before echoing louder than she wanted to admit. Inside the building, the hum of fluorescent lights met her like an old friend. Nora walked to the locker room, changed into her navy scrubs, and pulled her hair back into its usual knot. She looked at herself in the mirror. Same uniform, same circles under her eyes. But her expression held something unfamiliar, a flicker of anticipation. She stepped into the hallway, clipboard tucked under her arm, and froze. Elliot stood by the vending machine, arms crossed, as if he'd been waiting, but trying not to look like it. "Hi," he said. Nora raised a brow. "Is this your new hobby? Loitering near snack machines?" He smiled. "Only on Thursdays." She tried not to smile back. "Your dad's resting. He had a good afternoon." "That's good?" He hesitated. "You sang again last night." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway. "You heard?" He nodded. "I was nearby." Nora hugged the clipboard closer to her chest. "You should come in sometime. Sit with him." Elliot looked away. "I don't think he'd want that." "You don't know that." "No," he said quietly. "I don't. That's the problem." A beat passed between them. And then, from behind them, a voice broke the silence. "Well, well, if it isn't the music girl and the runaway son." They both turned. Miss Thelma approached in her wheelchair, wearing a cardigan covered in hand-stitched birds and a look of mischief in her eyes. She stopped beside them, sipping from a paper cup. "I heard the walls sing last night," she said, eyeing Nora. "Was that your doing again?" "I suppose it was," Nora replied carefully. Thelma turned to Elliot. "And you? You planning to stand outside that door forever? Or are you going to act like you've got bones in your spine?" "Thelma," Nora warned gently. "No, no. Let me finish," Thelma said, straightening. "I've been here long enough to know when something rare is blooming. That man in 6B, he was fading, not dying, worse, drifting. Then she came along with that voice, and suddenly the air changed." Elliot's face tightened. "And you, son? You're standing on the porch of a house you swore you'd never enter, but something's pulling you closer. So let me ask, what are you really afraid of?" He didn't answer. Thelma gave them both a pointed look and wheeled away, muttering, "Love always shows up where we least expect it. Just hope you've got the heart to recognize it." Nora exhaled. "She doesn't waste time with niceties." "She's not wrong," Elliot said quietly. They stood there, the silence pulsing. Then, cautiously, Elliot asked, "Would you teach me?" She blinked. "Teach you?" "To sing. That song. Smile. Just once." I want to sing it for him. Her first instinct was to say no. Not because she didn't want to, but because it felt too intimate, too exposed. She studied him. His eyes were unsure, but open, honest. "Why?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because you gave him something I couldn't, and I need to try. Just once." She nodded slowly. "Okay, but I'm warning you. I'm strict. I'll try not to embarrass myself. No promises," she said, letting a small smile slip through. That night, after rounds, they met in the empty staff lounge. It was a small room with a flickering overhead light, a piano in the corner covered in dust, and a couch that sank in the middle. Nora sat beside him, holding a printout of the lyrics. "Let's start with the melody," she said. "Hum it with me." They hummed together, off-key at first. He stumbled through the first few bars. "You're flat," she said gently. "I can't hear the difference." "You will. Try from here," she said, guiding him back to the starting note. They tried again, and again. Each time something softened. Something real began to form between the breath and the silence. "Better," she said after the 5th round. "Really?" She laughed. "Not really, but we're getting there." He looked at her, quiet, warm. "You're different when you teach." She paused. "Different how?" "You light up, like it matters, like you remember what your voice can do." She looked down, suddenly unsteady. "It used to matter, before things changed." "What happened?" Nora hesitated. Then, quietly, "Someone I trusted promised to help me make it big, said he believed in my voice. He left, took my savings, my guitar, everything." Elliot sat back, stunned. "You never got it back?" "No." She folded the lyric sheet carefully. "But that's not the worst part. The worst part was, I stopped singing, not just publicly. I stopped believing it meant anything." Silence stretched between them. "But last night," she added softly, "it felt like maybe it still does." Elliot reached for the page between them, then glanced up. "Can we keep going?" She met his gaze. "Yes," she said. "Let's keep going." And in that quiet room, under dusty light, with trembling notes and broken trust, they sang, not perfectly, not beautifully, but honestly. And for the first time in years, Nora felt something inside her begin to heal, one note at a time. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The following Friday, the sky turned an early grey. Thunder murmured somewhere out near the river, soft enough to be ignored but heavy enough to be felt. Inside Bellevue Manor, the light was dimmer than usual, filtered through rain-streaked windows and the hush that came with bad weather. Nora moved down the corridor slowly, her cart rattling slightly over the uneven tile. Her body felt tired, but her mind buzzed with something sharper. For the past 3 nights, she and Elliot had met in the staff lounge. Each session stretched later than the one before. They laughed. They sang. Sometimes they just sat quietly, lyric sheets between them, breathing the same song like a shared language neither of them had spoken in years. She hadn't told anyone, not because it was a secret, but because some things felt too new to name. At the end of the hall, Miss Thelma sat in her chair, wrapped in a lavender shawl, with a crossword puzzle on her lap. She looked up as Nora passed. "Well, there she is," Thelma said. "Our Florence Nightingale with a jazz heart." Nora smirked. "You're in a mood this morning." "I'm always in a mood. The difference is whether people notice." Thelma squinted at her. "You look like someone who hasn't slept, but doesn't mind." "Maybe I don't." "You seeing that boy?" Nora paused. "He's not a boy." "I know. He's a ghost who wears loafers and looks at you like he's remembering how to breathe." Nora flushed. It's not like that." "You sure?" Thelma tapped her pencil against her knee. "Because the way he watches you when you sing, honey, it's a prayer." Before Nora could answer, Dr. Singh appeared at the other end of the corridor, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. "Nora," he said, "can I speak with you a moment?" She followed him into the small glass-walled office near the nurse's station. He shut the door behind them, the hum of fluorescent lights pressing down between the silence. "I got Harold's latest neural scan back this morning," he said. "There's been a shift, nothing dramatic, but measurable. More response in the midbrain region. Sensory input, especially auditory." Nora's heart skipped. "You think he's hearing me?" Dr. Singh offered a cautious nod. "It's possible. It would explain the slight movement you charted on Wednesday. And we've seen this before. Music reaches parts of the brain that even trauma can't silence." Her throat tightened. "So, it matters?" "Yes." He studied her. "Which is why I want you to keep doing what you're doing." Nora exhaled. "Okay. And Nora," he added gently, "just be careful." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I've seen families come back from the edge here, and I've seen them break again. People cling to hope in strange ways, especially sons trying to fix things too late." Nora looked away. "I'm not here to fix anything." "I believe you," he said. "Just don't lose yourself trying." That night, the sky let loose. Rain drummed against the windows like impatient fingers on piano keys. Nora sat beside Harold's bed, his face dimly lit by the bedside lamp. She reached for the lyric sheet she had left folded in the drawer. The paper was soft at the corners now, worn by use. "You remember this one, Mr. Marchand?" she asked softly. "Elliot's starting to carry the tune, sort of." She smiled to herself, then began to hum. Her voice moved slowly, tenderly, like a hand reaching across a dark room. Outside, Elliot stood again at the edge of the door, but tonight he stepped inside. Just 2 steps. Nora looked up, startled. Her voice faded on the note. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice quiet but certain. "I want to try." She stood, motioning for him to take the chair. "He's listening." Elliot looked at his father. The man who once filled theaters, now silent under hospital linen. He sat down, unfolding the paper like it might tear in his hands. He took a shaky breath. Then, quietly, he sang, "Smile, though your heart is aching." His voice cracked on the second line. He paused, started again. "Smile, even though it's breaking." Nora stood just behind him, hands clasped together, barely breathing. Harold didn't move. But something in the air felt different, fuller, tighter. Elliot's voice faltered, but he kept going. all the way to the final note. When it ended, he looked down, his chest rising and falling like he'd just climbed a hill. "I know it wasn't good," he said. "It was honest," Nora replied. "That's better." Elliot looked at his father again, searching for something in that still face. "I used to think he didn't love us," he said, voice low. "Because he chose music over everything. But maybe music was the only way he knew how." Nora reached out, touching his shoulder. And in that moment, they weren't nurse and visitor, not even teacher and student. They were two people singing the same song for different reasons, yet somehow finding the same truth. From the hallway, Thelma watched them, silent and smiling. Inside room 6B, the monitors beeped steadily. Rain softened to a drizzle. And just beneath the silence, Harold Marchand's finger twitched. Again. The next day, the rain had passed, leaving puddles that reflected the swaying trees like brushstrokes on glass. Bellevue Manor was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that carried weight. Not emptiness, but expectation. Nora moved through her rounds with a gentle rhythm, but her thoughts kept drifting back to room 6B. To the look on Elliot's face when he sang. To the way his voice cracked, not from lack of skill, but from something deeper, something honest. Unpracticed emotion was always the hardest to hold. Miss Thelma waited for her outside the laundry room, balancing a styrofoam cup of peach tea in her lap. "Tell me something," she said as Nora passed. Nora stopped. "You're getting very good at surprise attacks." Thelma smirked. "Wasn't trying to be subtle. Did he sing?" Nora blinked. "Who told you?" Thelma leaned in. "Honey, walls here are thinner than grace in a Baptist choir." And that boy's voice? Like a baby deer learning how to walk. But he did it. That's what matters. Nora smiled despite herself. "He did?" Thelma's gaze turned knowing. "And it moved you?" "I'm not sure I'm ready to be moved." "That's the thing about being moved," Thelma said. "You don't get to schedule it. It just happens, like music or grief." Nora's eyes dropped to the floor. "It's complicated." "No, it's not," Thelma replied. "You're scared, and scared feels complicated. But it's just fear dressed up in excuses." Before Nora could respond, a call light blinked on the board behind her. She nodded once and turned away, her heart already tangled with words she hadn't said. Later that evening, the sky was clear, stars beginning to pepper the deep blue overhead. Nora stood in the courtyard on her break, arms folded, eyes tilted upward. The humidity had lifted slightly, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and gardenia. "You always look up like that?" Elliot's voice cut softly through the stillness. She didn't turn. "Only when I'm trying to remember something good." He stepped beside her. "What are you remembering tonight?" She thought for a moment. "The first time I sang in front of people. I was 11, a local talent show at a church in Macon. My dad sat in the front row and mouthed every word with me." Elliot glanced at her, something careful in his expression. "You miss him?" "Every day," she said, her voice a shade thinner than usual. "But somehow, when I sing, it feels like he's closer." A beat passed. Then Elliot said, "I think he'd be proud. Not just of your voice, of who you are." Nora looked at him finally. His sincerity disarmed her. "I don't know what this is," she said, barely above a whisper. "Between us, or what it's supposed to be." Elliot stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel his presence like a current. "It doesn't have to be anything yet," he said. "I'm not asking for answers. Just moments." A soft wind moved through the trees, rustling the ivy that climbed the courtyard walls. She swallowed. "You're different than I expected." "So are you." She smiled, but it faded quickly. "I don't want to be anyone's project, Elliot." His brows lifted. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know. You've got this world outside of here. Money, opportunity, escape. And I'm just—" "Don't," he said, gently but firmly. "Don't make yourself small for my sake." Nora's throat tightened. She looked away, blinking quickly. "I came here because I had to," Elliot continued. "But I stayed because of you, because for the first time in a long time, I'm not running from something. I'm listening." She met his gaze again, and for a breath, the noise of the world disappeared. Then the intercom crackled overhead. "Nurse Bellamy, please report to Station B." She exhaled. "Duty calls." Elliot nodded. "Later tonight?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Same time." Back inside, the hallway was dimmed for evening, the rhythm of the night shift just beginning. Nora moved from room to room with practiced hands, but a heart slightly out of sync. By the time she reached 6B, the air felt different, lighter somehow. She checked Harold's vitals, normal, steady. Then, just before she turned away, she noticed something. A faint shift in his right hand. Not a twitch. A curl. His fingers moved ever so slightly toward the blanket. She stepped closer, eyes wide. "Mr. Marchand?" No response, but the motion had been real. Her pulse quickened. She pulled the chair close, sat down, and took his hand in hers, warm, stronger than before. "You heard him, didn't you?" she whispered. The old man lay still, but she felt it now, not just a body occupying space, but a presence, a faint ember refusing to die. Nora squeezed his hand gently. "He's trying, and so am I." That night, in the staff lounge, she waited for Elliot. He arrived 10 minutes late, slightly breathless, holding a brown paper bag. "Sorry," he said. "I made something." She blinked. "Made?" He opened the bag and pulled out a small Tupperware. "Butternut squash risotto. You mentioned it once, back by the vending machines." Her heart caught. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you say," he replied without hesitation. Nora sat back, stunned. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a caretaker, not as a voice, but as a person. They ate quietly, knees brushing once and neither pulling away. When the meal was done, Nora pulled out a fresh copy of the lyrics. "Let's pick it up from the bridge," she said. Elliot smiled, voice low. "Lead the way." And once again, beneath flickering light and a growing sense of something unspoken, they began to sing. The following week arrived in soft golds and cool evenings. Savannah had entered that fleeting window between spring and summer, when jasmine bloomed heavy on the breeze and the streets glistened in late sunlight like they were holding on to something they couldn't quite keep. Nora pushed open the window in the break room and let the warm air in. The hospice wing had been unusually still all evening, as if the building itself was waiting for something. Down the hallway, the hum of machines whispered their steady rhythm. She looked toward the lounge where they always met after rounds and felt that tiny flutter in her chest again. Elliot had been coming every night. Not just to sing, not just to see his father, but to see her. He brought food, asked about her day, listened like no one else ever had. He wasn't loud about it. That wasn't his way. He showed up. He remembered the small things. And more, she found herself anticipating his voice in the quiet. And yet something about it scared her. "Why are you pacing like a girl with a secret?" Thelma asked from her chair near the front desk, her crossword untouched for once. Nora froze. "I'm not pacing. You've walked past me 3 times and looked down every hall like you're waiting for a train that might not stop. I'm just checking the floor." "You're checking your heart," Thelma replied, eyes narrowed. "That boy's under your skin." Nora turned to face her. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Thelma said, "especially when it's real. I can't afford to get attached." "Honey," Thelma said, folding her arms, "you're already attached. The only question is whether you're going to admit it before it's too late." Nora didn't respond. She couldn't, because the truth sat too close to the surface. By the time she reached 6B, the sun had dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the room. Harold lay still, his face relaxed, his right hand now consistently curled, just enough to give her hope. She sat beside him, voice barely above a whisper. "He's learning, you know, Elliot. He's off-key, but his heart's in it. Maybe more than he realizes." The door creaked gently behind her. "You talk about me like I'm not here." She turned. Elliot stood with a half-smile and a warm gaze, holding 2 cups of tea. "Is one of those for me?" she asked. "Depends. Are you going to keep insulting my pitch?" She laughed. "Then yes." He handed her a cup, then pulled the second chair beside her. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping tea in the dim light. "I've been thinking," Elliot said. "Dangerous." He chuckled. "Maybe. But do you think he knows I'm here?" Nora looked at Harold's face. "I think, if he can hear anything, it's you. And maybe me." Elliot leaned forward slightly. "I want to do more than sing. I want to connect. Somehow. I don't even know what I'd say if he woke up. How do you speak to someone who chose distance your whole life?" "Maybe you don't speak," Nora said. "Maybe you sing until the silence breaks." He looked at her. "Is that what you're doing?" She didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she finally said. "I just know that when I'm here, I don't feel lost." The words hung between them, intimate and unguarded. Elliot's hand brushed hers, lightly, uncertainly. She didn't move. A beat passed, then another. But before either could speak again, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Dr. Singh appeared in the doorway, looking between them. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "Nora, I need a moment." She followed him into the hallway, leaving Elliot and Harold behind. Dr. Singh's expression was unreadable. "There's something I need to show you." He led her to his office and opened Harold's chart on the monitor. "This is from the last 2 scans," he said. "His responsiveness has increased another 12%. Nora's eyes widened. That's not minor." "No. And we think the auditory stimulus is driving it. Which means, whatever you're doing, keep doing it." She stared at the screen, a tightness building in her chest. "It's working," she whispered. "Yes." He looked at her carefully. "But so is the connection. And I need to ask, are you aware of how much Elliot's investing into this?" She turned. "What do you mean?" "He's been covering the costs of his father's care personally, beyond insurance, equipment upgrades, private staff shifts, quiet donations." Nora blinked. "I didn't know that." "I think he wants to keep it quiet. But someone like him, he doesn't usually stay long in one place." She understood the warning, even if he didn't say it out loud. Later that night, after her shift ended, Nora found Elliot in the courtyard. He stood by the stone fountain, looking out at the darkened sky. "You didn't have to do all that," she said softly behind him. He turned. "What?" "The equipment, the donations, the extra nurses." His shoulders lifted, then dropped. "I didn't do it for recognition. I know. I did it because I never tried before. Not really. Not like this." She stepped closer. "And what happens when this is over?" He looked at her, eyes shadowed. "I don't know. Because I can't fall into something that disappears when it gets complicated." He nodded, slowly. "I'm not asking you to fall. I'm just asking you not to walk away before we even know what this is." Her breath caught. Elliot took a step toward her, his voice lower now. "I'm not running, Nora. I'm showing up." She hesitated. "Then keep showing up." "I will." They stood in silence, stars hidden behind the haze, something unspoken pulsing between them. And in the background, inside room 6B, Harold's eyes fluttered. Just once. Enough to change everything. The next morning arrived without warning. The sunrise was soft and blurred by clouds, but the mood inside Bellevue Manor felt sharper. Hushed conversations passed between nurses, glances cast toward room 6B more frequently than usual. Something had shifted. Nora walked into the break room, barely set her bag down before Marcy, the day nurse, turned toward her with wide eyes. "Your guy," she whispered. "Room 6B. Blinked. Twice. This morning. On his own." Nora froze. "Are you serious?" "Charted it myself. Reflexes too. He's coming around." The words hit her like a chord struck deep inside. Equal parts joy and fear. Because if Harold woke up, everything would change. She moved quickly down the hall, her heart thudding louder with each step. When she reached the door, she paused, smoothing her scrubs, gathering herself. Inside, Harold looked the same. Still, quiet, eyes closed. But there was something different in the room. A hum in the air, as if the space itself knew something it hadn't yesterday. She stepped closer. "Good morning, Mr. Marchand," she said softly. His fingers twitched again, not just a fluke, a deliberate movement. She placed her hand gently over his. "You're still in there, aren't you?" The door behind her creaked open. Elliot stood there, his hair damp from the mist outside, holding 2 coffees and a hopeful expression that faded slightly when he saw the look on her face. "What is it?" he asked, stepping in. Nora turned. He moved again, blinked this time. "They charted it this morning." Elliot's lips parted. "Are you serious?" "He's trying," she whispered. "He's fighting his way back." Elliot set the coffees down, pulled a chair close to the bed, and stared at his father's face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elliot said, "What if he wakes up and hates me for not being here sooner?" Nora looked at him, her voice quiet. "Then you'll forgive him, or you won't, but you'll know you tried. That has to count for something." He nodded, slow and unsure. She sat beside him, her voice softer now. "What was he like when you were young?" Elliot leaned back in his chair. "Distant, brilliant. Every room lit up when he walked into it, except ours. He gave everything to music, audiences, studios, recordings, but home, that was different." "Did he teach you to play?" Elliot shook his head. "He tried once. When I was 10, I was clumsy, out of rhythm. He stopped after the first week, said I wasn't ready. I thought he meant I wasn't good enough." Nora's heart ached at the truth in his voice. "I spent years chasing other things, tech, startups, success. I wanted to be nothing like him. And yet, I built walls just like he did. You didn't seem like the wall-building type, she said gently. That's because you found the door, he said, eyes locking on hers. She looked down, suddenly feeling the weight of his words. Elliot, she began, but he interrupted. I'm not asking you to say anything. I just needed you to know. Before she could respond, the call light blinked outside room 2C. Nora stood. I have to check that. He nodded. I'll stay. She left, her mind still tethered to his voice. Later that evening, Nora walked into the empty chapel down the hall. It wasn't large, just a quiet room with wooden pews and stained glass windows that cast blue and gold light across the floor. She sat in the front pew, clasped her hands, and closed her eyes. She hadn't prayed in a long time. Not really. But tonight, she whispered into the silence. Please, if he's coming back, let it be in peace. Let there be grace. For him. For Elliot. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. Elliot sat beside her, his voice low. This place reminds me of my mom. Nora opened her eyes slowly. You talk about her like she's music. She was. The quiet kind. She used to sit at the piano and play lullabies she'd learned by ear. My father never joined in, but he'd listen from the hallway. Every time. She loved you. She did, he said. And after she died, something broke in both of us. He buried himself in work. I buried myself in distance. You're unburying it now. Elliot turned to face her. Because you made it safe to. Nora looked at him, every word sitting heavy between them. I'm scared, she said finally. Of what? That this isn't real. That we're just two people leaning on each other because of a quiet room and a sick man and a song that means something. He reached for her hand, not forcefully, just gently. Open. What if we're two people who found each other in the one place we never expected to? Her fingers laced with his, slowly, willingly. Then, across the hall, the hallway monitor beeped, twice. They both turned. It was 6B. They ran. When they entered the room, Harold's eyes were open, fully, blinking, slowly. Elliot froze. Dad? Harold's lips moved, dry, fragile. He tried again. Elliot. The room fell still. Nora's hand flew to her mouth. Elliot dropped into the chair beside the bed, tears welling in his eyes. I'm here, he whispered, gripping his father's hand. I'm here. Harold blinked, slowly. Then, the faintest curve touched his lips. A smile. Small. Real. And for the first time in decades, Elliot smiled back. The next morning, the sunlight poured in differently, as if it too had heard the news. The corridors of Bellevue Manor carried a quiet buzz. Nurses smiled a little more, and Miss Thelma rolled past the front desk, humming something that sounded suspiciously like Moon River. Harold Marchand was awake. Nora stood just outside his room, her hands trembling around a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Every breath felt too shallow, like her chest was still trying to catch up to the moment that had shifted everything. Inside, Dr. Singh conducted a slow neurological assessment. Harold blinked, followed simple commands, and tracked with his eyes. His speech was faint and slurred but present, alive. His gaze lingered on his son, as if memorizing the face he hadn't seen clearly in a long time. Elliot never left the chair. "He's responding better than I expected," Dr. Singh said softly, as Nora finally stepped into the room. "It'll take time, but this is something none of us could have predicted." Nora nodded, her eyes locked on Harold. He turned his head, just slightly, and looked at her. Nora felt her throat tighten. "She sang," Harold murmured, barely audible. "She sang." Elliot smiled, eyes full of emotion. "That's Nora, Dad." Harold's gaze lingered on her. "You sound like her." Nora moved closer. "Your wife." He nodded, slowly. "Anne, she sang too." "I know," Nora whispered. "Elliot told me." Harold closed his eyes for a moment, tears pooling beneath his lashes. When he opened them again, his voice cracked. "Thank you." She couldn't speak, couldn't move. The gratitude in his face said more than any words could reach. Dr. Singh gently stepped back. "Let's give him some rest." They walked out into the hallway, silence heavy around them. Elliot exhaled slowly. "I didn't think I'd ever hear his voice again." Nora leaned against the wall. "Neither did I." He turned to her, something raw in his eyes. "You made this happen." "I didn't." "You did," he interrupted. "You sang when no one else would. You stayed when I didn't." "Nora, you brought him back." She shook her head, eyes stinging. "No, I saw something in him, and I couldn't walk away." Elliot stepped closer. "You changed everything." Before she could answer, Miss Thelma appeared at the corner, gliding toward them like she'd been waiting all morning to speak. "I hear we've got a miracle in 6B, she said, her voice warm. "You know what that means?" "What?" Nora asked cautiously. Thelma tapped her lap. "It's time we had some music around here. A real concert, not just you whisper singing in rooms like a ghost." Elliot laughed. "You're serious?" "I haven't been this serious since I found out there were 4 seasons of Downton Abbey," she said. "I want a show. For the residents. For Harold. For everyone who forgot what live music feels like." Nora looked hesitant. "I haven't performed in years." Thelma raised an eyebrow. "And yet somehow, you performed your way into healing a man everyone gave up on." Elliot turned to her. "She's right. Let's do it. Let's plan something simple. You sing, I'll play rhythm guitar, and Dad, maybe he'll be ready to listen." Nora hesitated, the idea both thrilling and terrifying. Dr. Singh approached them again, clipboard in hand. "I heard the word concert," he said, smiling faintly. "Just make sure we have wheelchairs lined up. I have a few patients who'll need the aisle seats." Nora laughed softly. "Okay, but this won't be fancy." "It doesn't need to be," Elliot said. "Just honest." 3 days later, the small common room was rearranged. Staff pulled chairs into semicircles. A dusty microphone was cleaned and set up on a portable stand. Someone had wheeled in a keyboard from the rec room, and a maintenance worker rigged an extension cord through the hallway just to get it powered. The room smelled like lavender spray and old books. Nora stood at the back, adjusting the mic height with trembling fingers. Elliot tuned a borrowed guitar beside her, glancing up. "You okay?" She nodded once. "Nervous, but okay." The first guests arrived, residents in chairs and wheelchairs, some with oxygen tanks, others holding warm mugs and small folded blankets. Miss Thelma rolled in, wearing a sparkly scarf and red lipstick. "I expect tears," she declared, Or at least goosebumps. Nora took her place behind the mic. The room quieted. Elliot stood beside her, his guitar resting softly against his chest. She looked out at the faces before her, some eager, some distant, some too tired to show much at all. But they were here. They were listening. She took a breath and sang. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice was steady, deeper than it used to be, richer with time and ache. Elliot joined in gently on guitar, his chords warm and grounding. The room shifted, shoulders relaxed, eyes lifted. They sang 2 songs, then paused. Nora stepped back slightly as Elliot spoke. "This next one is special," he said. "It's for someone who spent a lot of time in silence, but who reminded us that silence doesn't mean absence. Sometimes it means waiting." He turned to Nora, and she sang, "Smile." No walls, no echo, just her voice, raw and real, filling every quiet corner of the room. Harold had been wheeled in halfway through. When she sang the final note, his hand lifted, trembled, and clapped, soft but undeniable. The room erupted. Applause, laughter, even a few tears. Nora's breath caught as Harold looked up at her with eyes that remembered everything. She turned to Elliot, overwhelmed. He leaned in. "You did it," he whispered. "Again." "No," she breathed. "We did." And for the first time in years, the common room wasn't just a place of passing time. It was a place where something began. The days that followed the concert felt suspended in soft light. A hush had settled over Bellevue Manor, not the quiet of sorrow, but something gentler, like reverence, as if the walls themselves were still absorbing the sound of music and miracle. Nora walked the halls with a new kind of stillness inside her, not fear, not even anticipation, but presence. She felt the moments more now, the clink of a spoon in the dining room, the brush of a blanket being folded, the way Patience smiled longer when she passed by. And Harold was changing every day. He could speak now in small phrases, weak, sure, but words all the same. He recognized names. He nodded when Elliot entered. He asked about the weather. And yesterday, for the first time, he hummed along as Nora sang to another resident down the hall. The sound had stopped her mid-verse. She hadn't even realized what it was at first, just a low, rhythmic hum. Then she turned and saw him. Sitting in his chair, eyes half closed, lips moving in quiet time with her melody. She hadn't cried then. But later, alone in the break room, she had. Now, she found herself outside on the courtyard bench, the same one she and Elliot had sat on weeks earlier. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and dusk painted the sky in strokes of apricot and navy. Elliot joined her without a word, carrying 2 paper cups of peach tea. "I asked the kitchen staff to start stocking this again," he said as he handed her one. "Miss Thelma said it was non-negotiable." Nora smiled. "You're braver than most." "I'm learning that," he said, sitting beside her. "How's he today?" "Sharper, quieter. He's been asking questions. Wants to know how long he was out, what he missed." Elliot looked out over the garden. "That's going to be a long conversation." Nora studied his face. He looked tired, but not in the way he used to. This wasn't burnout. It was emotional wear, the kind that came from digging up old roots and deciding which ones to keep. "Have you told him yet?" she asked softly. Elliot glanced at her. "About what?" "Everything. Why you stayed, why you sang, Why you came back? He hesitated. Not yet. Why? Because I'm afraid the answer will hurt both of us. Nora turned fully to him. And what is the answer? He met her eyes. That I needed to believe he could change, so I could finally change too. Her breath caught. That concert, he continued, was the first time I saw him not as the man who left, but as someone who'd been trying all along in his own broken way. Nora looked down at the cup in her hands. Maybe that's all any of us are doing, trying in our own broken way. A long silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, full of things they hadn't said yet. Maybe couldn't. Finally, Elliot said, I want to show you something. He stood, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out a small square box. Nora stared at it. What is that? He sat back down beside her, opened it slowly. Inside was a vintage microphone charm, polished chrome with a black enamel base, strung delicately on a silver chain. I found it at a second-hand shop downtown, he said. It reminded me of the one you told me about, the one your father gave you. Nora blinked, her throat tightening. I had it cleaned, fixed the clasp. I don't know why I bought it at first. I saw it and thought of your voice, of how it brought him back, of how it brought me back. She reached for it slowly, hands trembling. I haven't had anything like this in years, she whispered. Not since everything was taken. It's yours, he said. You earned it 100 times over. She held it in her palm, silent. I wanted to give it to you earlier, he added, but I didn't want it to feel like payment. It doesn't, she said, eyes still fixed on the charm. It feels like remembering who I was before I forgot. She looked up at him, emotion flickering in her gaze. I don't know what to do with all this, she said softly. All what? This feeling. You. Him. The past coming back in pieces I didn't ask for. But now, can't imagine losing. Elliot leaned in, voice steady. Then don't lose it. Let it stay. Let it grow. I'm scared, she admitted, of needing something again. He reached for her hand, warm and sure. Then let's be scared together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world slowed around them. The fountain gurgled softly in the background, and the last birds of the evening made their final song. And then Nora did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't scripted. It was real, and full of everything they'd built in silence, in music, in late nights and fragile hopes. When they pulled apart, Elliot rested his forehead against hers. I've waited years to feel something like this, he whispered. So have I, she breathed. A light flicked on inside the manor, and a shadow moved across the hall. Dr. Singh stepped outside, smiling gently. Thought I'd find you both here, he said. Harold's asking for you. Nora stood, heart still full. For both of us? Elliot asked. Yes, Dr. Singh said. And Nora? He asked if you'd bring the microphone. She looked down at the charm still resting in her palm. I'll bring the real one, she said with a quiet smile. And together they walked back inside, toward the room where everything had started, and where something entirely new was waiting to begin. The sun was just beginning to spill over the wrought iron balconies of Savannah when Nora walked into Bellevue Manor, the vintage microphone charm resting lightly against her collarbone. She wore it tucked under her scrub top, close to her chest like a promise no one could see. But she felt it. Every step. She moved through the morning shift with quiet efficiency, but her mind kept drifting back to the night before. The kiss. The way Elliot's hand had held hers like he'd meant it, like he wasn't going anywhere. And Harold, asking for them, for her. The weight of that alone was still sinking in. "Hey," Marcy waved her clipboard like a flag as she passed. "Your guy's awake and sassy this morning." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Sassy?" "Asked me if the jello was still terrible. When I said yes, he said, 'At least some things haven't changed.'" Nora laughed, warmth blooming in her chest. "I'll check on him now." Room 6B was filled with morning light, filtered through the blinds in soft streaks across the floor. Harold sat propped up, his eyes clearer than she'd ever seen them. He looked like himself now. Not just a man returned from silence, but a man reassembling who he used to be. He turned his head when she entered. "Nora." She smiled. "Good morning." "Is it?" he asked, a spark of dry humor in his voice. "I was just told I've lost 12 pounds, 3 birthdays, and a shot at making it to Carnegie again." "You gained a better audience," she replied, setting his chart down. "We've got Thelma down the hall, and she's more intimidating than any New York critic." He chuckled softly, then looked toward the door. "Is Elliot here?" He stepped out for a coffee run, said he needed something stronger than hospital brew. Harold nodded. A pause stretched between them. "I remember your voice," he said finally. "Not just the songs. The way you spoke. Kind. Calm. Like the world wasn't crumbling." Nora's throat tightened. "I didn't think you could hear me." "I heard everything," he said. "Every lyric. Every word. Even the silence between." She moved closer, unsure if she should sit or stand. "I'm glad you're back," she said. "I'm not sure where I went," he murmured, "but I know it wasn't here." Another pause. Then Harold looked directly at her. "He loves you." Nora blinked. "Excuse me?" "My son. He doesn't say it. Not yet, but I can see it." "I don't—" Harold raised a weak hand. "Don't brush it off. I spent a lifetime letting love pass me by. I knew how to play a room full of strangers better than I knew how to hold my wife's hand during dinner. Don't make the same mistake." Her heart beat faster. Before she could respond, the door opened and Elliot stepped in, 2 coffees in hand. "Thought I'd bring backup," he said, holding one out to her. Nora accepted it wordlessly, still reeling. Harold smiled faintly. "You two rehearsed that timing?" Elliot chuckled. "I think the universe did." The morning passed in soft conversation. Harold grew tired by noon, and as the nurses helped him rest, Nora and Elliot stepped into the hallway. The silence between them was different now, charged, meaningful. "He told me," Nora said quietly. Elliot frowned. "Told you what?" "That you love me." Elliot looked at her, eyes wide. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. "I do." She took a breath. "That's fast." "I know," he said, "but everything about this has been fast, and slow, and strange, and real." Her fingers curled around the microphone charm at her chest. "I care about you," she said, voice shaking. "But I'm scared this is just the moment, the emotion, the miracle. What happens when life goes back to normal?" He didn't flinch. "Then we find a new normal, one that includes you, and him, and music, and maybe even a broken-down upright piano in a shared apartment." She laughed despite the tears in her eyes. You'd really stay here? In Savannah? I'd stay anywhere that feels like home, he said. And right now, that's wherever you are. Before she could reply, Dr. Singh appeared at the corner of the hallway, his expression unreadable. Elliot, he said. You have a visitor waiting in my office. Said she's from Boston. Claimed she's your assistant? Elliot's expression shifted. He nodded slowly. That's unexpected. Nora stiffened slightly. You have an assistant? I did, he said. Before I took this leave, I told her not to come. Dr. Singh gave a tight smile. She's persistent. As Elliot disappeared down the hallway, something in Nora's chest tightened. She didn't want to be the girl who doubted, who jumped to conclusions. But something about the suddenness of it dug at her peace like a loose thread. Back in the staff lounge, she sat with her tea untouched, staring out the window. The air was warm, but her hands were cold. 10 minutes passed, then 20. When Elliot finally returned, his expression was carefully guarded. She came to remind me, he said quietly, that I have a board meeting in Seattle next week, that my team is expecting an update, that I have an entire other life I've been ignoring. Nora stared at him. What did you say? That I wasn't ready. And? He looked down. She didn't take it well. Said I was throwing away everything I'd built for a ghost of a family, and a woman I barely know. Nora flinched. Wow. She was wrong, he said firmly. But it made me realize, this bubble we've been living in, music, healing, late-night walks, it can't protect us from reality forever. No, she said softly. It can't. He stepped closer. But that doesn't mean it's not real. I just need to know, she whispered, that when the emotion fades, you'll still be here. He reached for her hand, held it gently. I'm not going anywhere, but I do need to go to Seattle, just for a few days. I need to close that chapter the right way, face the version of me I left behind. Nora swallowed hard. Okay. Will you wait? She nodded. As long as you promise to come back. His voice broke slightly. I promise. They stood like that, quiet, hearts tangled. And neither of them noticed that down the hall, in room 6B, Harold Marchand was sitting upright, staring at the piano catalogue one of the nurses had left on the windowsill. He pointed to one and smiled. The train pulled out of Savannah just after dawn, its whistle cutting through the fog like a thread through silk. Nora stood on the platform long after it had gone, the warmth of Elliot's last kiss still lingering on her lips. He had held her hands, promised to return by the weekend. Just a few days in Seattle to close the loop, he'd said. Tie up loose ends. No goodbyes, just a pause. But even as she replayed his words, a quiet ache had bloomed in her chest. Not panic, just uncertainty. The kind that rises when something begins to matter more than you thought it ever would. By noon, she was back in room 6B. Harold was more alert now, speaking in full sentences, asking about things like time and headlines, as if the world outside had stopped for him, and now he was catching up. You look distracted, he said, his eyes following her as she adjusted his IV line. I'm fine, she lied, then glanced at him. Elliot left for a few days. Harold's brow lifted. Ah. He said it's just for work. He'll be back before the weekend. Will he? The words were soft, not cruel, but they landed with more weight than she was ready for. She looked at him, startled. You don't think he will? Harold sighed and looked down at his folded hands. My son, he's always been pulled in two directions, heart and legacy. One of them always wins. She swallowed. He's not the same person anymore. I hope not, Harold said quietly. But change is only real when it holds under pressure. The silence between them thickened. I'm sorry, he added. That wasn't fair. It's okay, Nora whispered. You're just scared. So am I. That night, the manor felt colder. The wind knocked against the old windows and whistled faintly through the gaps in the glass. Nora sat at the piano in the chapel, fingers resting on the keys without pressing them. She stared into the darkened space, waiting for the melody to come. But it didn't. She closed the lid gently and walked outside into the garden instead. The moonlight traced everything in silver. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Elliot. Landed. Got through the board meeting. Will call tomorrow. Miss you. She read it twice, then once more, slower. But something about it felt distant. By the second day, he hadn't called. Just a message. Meetings ran long. Exhausted. Talk soon. By the third, nothing. And by the fourth, she was back in the break room, staring at her phone like it might suddenly answer the questions she couldn't speak out loud. Miss Thelma rolled in slowly, her shawl wrapped tight, holding a mug of chamomile like it was armor. You waiting for a ghost? She asked. Nora gave a weak smile. Maybe. Thelma rolled closer. You're thinking about the what-ifs, aren't you? I'm trying not to. Thelma tilted her head. Let me guess. He left soft, promised quick, and now you're starting to wonder if quick ever meant real. Nora didn't answer. She didn't have to. Thelma leaned in. You don't wait for the truth, honey. You sing it out of the silence. That night, Nora returned to room 6B. Harold was reading something light, a jazz memoir with worn corners and a bookmarked page. He looked up when she entered. Still no word? She shook her head. He hesitated, then nodded toward the small speaker on his side table. Play something. Just for me. She pulled her phone from her pocket, scrolled through her playlist, and settled on Someone to Watch Over Me. As the melody filled the room, Harold closed his eyes and hummed along, one hand tapping gently against the blanket. When the final notes faded, he opened his eyes again. You know, when Anne left me the first time, I thought it was just a break. But it was a warning. She needed more than applause. She needed presence. Nora looked down. I think Elliot's trying. I think you want to believe that, Harold said softly. And maybe you're right. But love, real love, doesn't need to be chased. It circles back. The next morning, Nora walked into the chapel again. This time, she brought the vintage microphone charm with her. She set it gently on the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. She sang. Not for Harold, not for Elliot, for herself. When she finished, she sat in the silence, her breath slowing. She looked at the charm again and whispered, Circle back to me. Outside, the clouds shifted, and somewhere above the city, Elliot Marchand sat alone in a boardroom overlooking Seattle Bay, his phone in his hand, her voice playing quietly through his headphones. The last voicemail she'd left. Just a simple message. I'll be here, but not forever. His fingers hovered over the screen, and this time he called. The call came just after sunset. Nora had finished her shift early and was sitting on the porch swing outside her Aunt Martha's house, still in her scrubs, barefoot, holding a cup of mint tea that had long gone cold. The sky was turning that dusky pink savannah wore so well, and the magnolias were in bloom, the scent thick and nostalgic. Her phone vibrated on the cushion beside her. Elliot. She stared at the screen, breath caught between hope and hurt. Then she answered. There was a pause. Not silence, just the kind of pause that meant someone had been rehearsing what to say, but forgot every word the second the line connected. I'm sorry, Elliot said finally, voice low and rough. I should have called sooner. I should have. You didn't, she said quietly. Another pause. I got lost in it, he said. The meetings, the obligations, the voice in my head that said, if I didn't tie up every loose end, I'd lose everything I built. And what about what we were building? She asked, not harshly, but truthfully. I almost lost that too, he said. But I haven't. Not if you'll let me fix it. She looked up at the sky, stars just beginning to peek through. I'm not something you fix, Elliot. I'm someone you show up for, even when it's inconvenient. I know, he whispered. I forgot that. I forgot what it felt like to be seen for who I am when I'm not performing. I wasn't asking for perfection, she said. Just presence. I want to come back, he said. Not just to visit. I want to stay, for real. Why now? She asked, her voice soft but steady. Because every part of that city felt hollow without you, he said. Because I kept hearing your voice in my headphones when I should have been hearing my own. Because I walked into a boardroom full of everything I used to want. And it didn't feel like anything. She closed her eyes, letting the silence stretch. I don't need a grand gesture, she said. I just need you to mean it. I do, he said. I'll be on the first flight tomorrow morning. She said nothing, not right away. The wind moved gently through the trees. A dog barked down the street. Life went on, whether you were ready for it or not. I'll be at the manor, she said. Room 6B. When she hung up, her hands were shaking, not because she didn't believe him, but because she finally did. The next morning, she arrived at Bellevue Manor before her shift. She stepped into room 6B with a warm smile and a sense of something waiting in the air. Harold was already sitting upright, a crossword puzzle in his lap, and reading glasses perched low on his nose. You look like someone who's expecting a plot twist, he said. She chuckled. Maybe I am. Harold tilted his head. Elliot? She nodded. I thought he might, Harold murmured. There's something about you that brings people home. She moved to check his chart, blinking fast to keep her voice steady. He wants to stay. He says this is where he's supposed to be. And what do you say? I say, I want him to be sure. Not swept up in a feeling, but anchored in it. Harold smiled faintly. The first song Anne ever sang to me was Come Rain or Come Shine. Never realized how true it had to be until I was sitting alone, listening to the echo of it. Just before noon, the front desk buzzed. He was here. Nora walked into the lobby as Elliot stepped through the doors, suitcase in hand, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. She looked the same, and completely different. Stronger, steadier. like someone who had stopped waiting for answers and started becoming one. He crossed the space between them slowly, as if afraid to speak too soon. She didn't make it easy. "Tell me why you're really here," she said. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you," he said. "Because when I was away, I realized what I need most isn't success or control or a title. It's someone who looks at me the way you do. Like I'm worth the work, worth the waiting." "And what happens when the shine wears off?" she asked. "Then I stay," he said, "and keep choosing you." She exhaled. The tension in her chest softened, not disappeared, but softened. "Okay," she said. "Let's see if we still sing in the same key." He smiled, stepping closer. "I brought my guitar, just in case." They walked down the hall side by side, not touching, but closer than they'd ever been. As they reached Harold's room, a voice called from inside. "About time," Harold muttered. "I was starting to think you two would only reunite in song." Elliot laughed. Nora rolled her eyes. And somewhere in that old, quiet building, the hum of healing played beneath every breath. The days that followed passed like pages turned gently by a breeze. Elliot stayed. Not as a visitor, not as a guest passing through. He unpacked. He bought a small apartment near the square, nothing extravagant. Just a warm corner with wooden floors and morning light that poured in like honey. And Nora, she didn't ask him to prove anything. She just watched. Quietly. Carefully. Because presence was a promise that could only be kept in time. Bellevue Manor felt different too. Lighter. As if Harold's awakening had shifted something deeper than just medical odds. Music drifted through the halls more often now. Real music. Nora's voice in the chapel. Harold's fingers finding keys on the dusty piano they'd finally moved to the sunroom. And Elliot, strumming his guitar quietly from the corner, still learning, still trying, but no longer afraid of the sound of his own vulnerability. One warm Friday morning, Miss Thelma wheeled herself into the rec room, wearing her finest scarf and a fresh dab of perfume. She looked around the half-filled room, nodded once, and declared, "We need another concert." Nora laughed from across the room. "You're insatiable." "I'm retired, not expired," Thelma said, "and music keeps the bones from giving up entirely." Harold, seated by the piano with a sketchpad in his lap, smiled. "She's not wrong. Something about rhythm makes the blood remember it's alive." Elliot, perched on the piano bench beside his father, looked to Nora. "We could make it more than just music." "What if we made it a fundraiser?" "For what?" she asked. "For expanding music therapy," he said. "You've seen what it's done here. Why stop at Bellevue?" Nora blinked. "You're serious?" "As a melody," Harold chimed in, setting down his sketchpad. On it, rough outlines of instruments, clarinet, cello, violin, and beneath them, in block letters, "Music is medicine." Nora crossed the room slowly. "You want to start something?" Elliot nodded. "Dad wants to teach again. You could run the therapy program. We could build something real, together." Her heart beat faster. "I don't know the first thing about running a non-profit," she said. "I do," Elliot replied. "I've done it before, but I've never had a reason that mattered like this." Nora looked between the two of them, the father once lost in silence, now sketching a dream, the son who had once stood in the hallway like a ghost, now speaking with steady conviction. It felt possible, but even possibility came with shadows. That evening, after most of the residents had gone to bed and the manor had settled into its usual hush, Nora stood in the chapel alone. The vintage microphone charm still hung from her neck, and she held the real one now. The old restored microphone Elliot had surprised her with the week after his return. She placed it on the stand, adjusted it with practiced hands, and took a breath. Behind her, footsteps approached. "I always know where to find you," Elliot said softly. She didn't turn. "It scares me." "What does?" "How much I want it all now. You, this place, the music, the project. It's everything I thought I'd lost. And I don't know how to hold it without waiting for it to slip through my fingers." He stepped closer, his voice a low whisper. "Then don't hold it like it's fragile. Hold it like it's alive." She turned to him, eyes shining in the half-light. "And if it breaks?" "Then we rebuild," he said. "Together." She let out a shaky breath. "Okay." Elliot reached into his pocket and unfolded a small piece of paper. "I talked to the city. They've got an old community space near the park that's barely used. We could start there." Nora took the paper, scanned the details, then smiled. "You already did the homework." "I had time, and I couldn't stop thinking about what it would mean if music wasn't just our memory, but our future." She moved to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his shoulder. "I never pictured a life like this," she murmured. "Me neither," he said. "But now, I can't picture anything else." And in that quiet room, where once she had sung alone to a man lost in sleep, now she stood with a man who had found his way back, through music, through forgiveness, through love that had started with a single note and become a symphony still unfolding. The evening sun filtered through the high windows of the old community center, casting golden streaks across folding chairs and freshly swept floors. The room had been transformed. Bare bones dressed in warmth. Strings of Edison bulbs lined the beams. A small stage had been raised with soft lighting, borrowed speakers, and an upright piano pushed stage left. It wasn't perfect, but it breathed with promise. Nora stood backstage, heart thudding behind her ribcage like a second pulse. She tugged nervously at the microphone cord, her fingers trembling, though her face was calm. "You ready?" Elliot asked, appearing at her side, adjusting the strap on his guitar. "No," she admitted. "But I'm going to do it anyway." He smiled, touched her elbow. "That's what makes it brave." She turned to him, voice low. "Do you remember when this was just a whisper? Just a voice in a quiet hallway?" "I remember thinking I'd never hear anything more honest," he said. Behind the curtain, voices buzzed softly. Residents from Bellevue Manor had taken the front rows, many wheeled in by volunteers. Miss Thelma sat center with a shawl that glittered under the lights. Dr. Singh stood near the back, hands folded, watching quietly. Even Harold had come, dressed in a navy sweater and seated beside the piano like he'd never left the stage at all. This wasn't just a concert. It was a full-circle moment, a healing stitched together with sound. The lights dimmed slightly. Elliot kissed Nora's forehead. "Let's give them something to remember." As he stepped onto the stage, applause stirred. Nora followed, head high, but her breath catching just beneath the surface. The lights were warm against her face, the weight of the mic familiar but different now. This time she wasn't singing to fill a silence. She was singing into something alive. Elliot strummed the first chord, soft, steady, like the first page of a story. Then he looked to her. She nodded once and began. "Smile, though your heart is aching." Her voice didn't waver. It rang clean and low, rising from somewhere honest and weathered. Every lyric landed like truth, spoken, not just sung. The room held its breath. By the second verse, she could see it. Eyes glistening, shoulders softening. The kind of stillness that only came when music did something deeper than entertain. Behind her, Harold placed his fingers on the piano and joined in. Slowly, deliberately. A few notes, then a gentle harmony. The crowd stirred. Applause rippled. When they finished, the room stayed quiet for a beat too long. That perfect silence. The kind filled with emotion that hadn't figured out how to exit yet. Then it broke. In applause. In laughter. In the shuffle of tissues pulled from pockets. Nora stepped back from the mic, heart racing. Elliot caught her eye. And before the second act began, before anyone else came forward, he turned to face the crowd, guitar still slung around him, breath caught. "I wasn't planning to say anything," he began, voice uneven, "but I think I'd regret it if I didn't." The room quieted again. "I came here a few months ago expecting to watch someone fade away. I didn't expect to find my father again, and I definitely didn't expect to find her." He turned to Nora, her breath hitched. She didn't just bring music back to him. She brought life back to all of us. A few murmurs of agreement echoed from the crowd. Elliot continued. "So tonight, I want to ask something, not just of her, but of all of you, because some questions should be asked in front of witnesses, especially when the answer already lives in every note we just played." He reached into his guitar case, pulled out a small black box. Gasps and quiet laughter rippled through the front rows. Nora froze. Elliot stepped forward, eyes locked on hers. "I used to think I had everything I needed in the world I built for myself. But the truth is, I didn't even have a melody until you walked into that room and sang." He opened the box. A ring, delicate, simple, gleamed in the lights. "You gave me music. You gave me family. You gave me the version of myself I never knew I was allowed to become. And I don't want another day without your voice in it." The crowd stilled. Nora blinked, tears spilling over her cheeks. "Will you marry me, Nora Bellamy?" he asked, voice shaking now. "Will you let this become the next verse of our story?" She didn't speak right away. She stepped forward slowly, eyes never leaving his. Then she took the mic again, voice breaking, but certain. "Yes," she whispered. The crowd erupted. Miss Thelma shouted something that sounded suspiciously like, "Took him long enough." Elliot slipped the ring onto her finger. They stood there, arms around each other in the glow of applause and promise. And behind them, Harold smiled through tears. The piano behind him hummed one final note. Not an ending, a beginning. 1 year later, Savannah exhaled into spring. Azaleas burst in pink and cream down every shaded block, and the air smelled like renewal. Sweet grass, warm rain, and morning coffee brewed in quiet kitchens that now belonged to 2 instead of 1. The community center on Lafayette Street had a new sign, the Bellamy Martian Music House. The letters were hand-painted, slightly imperfect, but full of soul. Inside, laughter echoed between piano chords and soft guitar strums, between clumsy harmonies and stories told through song. It wasn't just a center for music therapy now. It was a gathering place, a sanctuary, a second chance given structure and light. Nora stood in the doorway of one of the converted classrooms, now a recording space with thrift store rugs and velvet chairs that swallowed you whole. A young girl sat at the piano, her fingers unsure but eager. "Again," Nora said gently. "Don't think so hard. Just feel." The girl nodded and tried again. Better this time. Nora smiled, letting the sound bloom. From the hallway, Elliot leaned against the doorframe, watching her with the kind of quiet admiration that never asked for attention. He was dressed in a soft grey shirt, sleeves rolled, clipboard under one arm, and a coffee in the other. "She's come a long way," he said, once the girl left. Nora looked up. "So have we." They walked side by side down the hallway that still smelled faintly of new paint and old wood. Posters lined the walls, photos from the concert, quotes about healing, a printout of a message from Miss Thelma that simply read, "Keep the music honest." "She'd be proud," Nora said, stopping beside it. "She is proud," Elliot corrected. "She told me last week, then threatened me with herbal tea if I ever forgot to oil the guitar strings." Nora laughed. "Classic." They stepped into the sunlit atrium, where Harold sat by the window, sketching again, his hand steadier now, his eyes brighter. A group of teenagers gathered around him as he pointed to a rough diagram of a stage setup. "You've got to listen to the space," he said. "Every room has its own rhythm. It'll tell you how it wants to sound." One of the students raised his hand. "Is that why you always sit by the window?" Harold nodded. "Because even silence sings if you let it." Elliot and Nora watched from a distance, something soft and reverent passing between them. He turned to her. "I never thanked you." "For what?" "For staying. For seeing something in me when I couldn't see it myself." "You thanked me," she said. "You just didn't say it out loud." "And now?" he asked. She took his hand. "Now you don't need to." The bell above the front door chimed. A woman stepped inside, a stranger, maybe a donor, maybe someone searching for what they'd found here. Nora didn't move at first. Just listened to the familiar shuffle of shoes across wood, the echo of potential entering a space built for rediscovery. "Can I help you?" she asked, stepping forward. "I hope so," the woman said, smiling. "Someone told me this was a place for second chances." Nora nodded. "It is." That evening, as the sun dipped low over the square and cast everything in gold, they gathered again in the courtyard, residents, students, volunteers, people from all corners of the city, drawn by music and memory. Elliot adjusted the mic stand, while Nora flipped through her sheet music. Harold sat at the keys, eyes closed, fingers ready. The crowd hushed. And this time, they didn't start with Smile. They started with a new song, one Nora had written herself. A song about the first time she sang to someone who couldn't answer. About a hallway where she found a stranger listening. About waking up, not from sleep, but from fear. As her voice carried over the courtyard, people closed their eyes. Some smiled, some cried. All of them felt something they hadn't in a long time. When the last note fell away, Elliot stepped forward. "We didn't build this to be a business," he said. "We built it to be a bridge, a way back, for anyone who forgot that their story wasn't over." The applause was thunderous, but Nora didn't hear it. She looked at Harold. He was crying and smiling. Later, long after the courtyard had emptied, and the chairs had been stacked, and the instruments packed away, Nora sat with her feet in Elliot's lap, on the old velvet couch in the studio. "You ever think about how it all started?" she asked. He nodded. One song, one night shift, one voice in the dark. "Feels like a lifetime ago." "It was," he said. "But also, just the first verse." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We're going to do good things. We already are." Silence settled around them. Safe, warm, earned. Then Harold's voice called faintly from down the hall. "You two coming? Or should I start the next song without you?" Nora laughed, stood, and reached for Elliot's hand. And as they walked back toward the piano, toward light and rhythm, and everything they'd built from the quiet, she thought of all the nights she'd doubted the sound of her own voice. Now it was part of something bigger. Not an echo. A harmony. And it had only just begun. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.